The Through the Eyes of Jesus podcast is proud to partner with the Ministry League Network. This network aims to produce, distribute, and promote quality resources, devotionals, and podcasts to benefit individuals and local congregations for God's glory. You can learn more about Ministry League by visiting ministryleague.com or by clicking on their link in the show notes. We hope you enjoy another episode of the Through the Eyes of Jesus podcast as we seek to look at worldly problems from a godly perspective. It's an emergency. It's an emergency. Welcome back to the Through the Eyes of Jesus podcast, and we have an emergency. You know what that emergency is, Walker? A new episode just came out, and so that means we got to drop everything that we're doing and go listen to it. No, but for real, we are thankful for all of you guys at home who are listening to this episode when it drops, or even days and weeks and months afterwards. We're very, very thankful for all those who tune into this show.
I'll say we've been filled with a lot of energy today.
Hey, someone's got to have some energy. I don't know where it's coming from,
Right.
but someone's got to have some energy. Point is, we're very thankful for all of you at home who are joining us today. My name is Isaiah Leininger, in case I haven't said that already. Joining me today, as always, is my good friend Walker Howell, and we're very, very thankful to have you listening to the show today. Today is a very, very special episode where we're continuing or starting with season 12, where we are going to be talking all about mental health, talking to different counselors, talking to different therapists about mental health, especially from a Christian, from a biblical perspective. And I don't think we could have started off this season any better than how we're starting it off today. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Lonnie Jones.
Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Through the Eyes of Jesus podcast. I'm an honored guest. My name is Lonnie Jones. I'm a licensed professional counselor and a consultant. I've been in private practice for 25 years. Have worked in ministry since 1980. I volunteer in my community as a resource for the police department, as a chaplain to the SWAT team. I deal a lot with crisis intervention and de-escalation, and I also host a podcast, Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones Podcast Adventure, and it splits 50-50 between mental wellness and spiritual strengthening. So give you guys an invite to listen to that sometime when you can. I think you can see the logo over my shoulder. If I move out of the way, it's right under my dead antelope. All right, there we go. That's technically a pronghorn.
For our audience, this is just an audio podcast, but Walker and I got to see the lovely antelope. And
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, very nice kill.
253 yards.
That's impressive.
Folded him up like a church check.
But like Walker was saying, if you want to check out Brother Lonnie's podcast and some of the things that he's up to, we'll have that linked down in the show notes and also on our website, www.tteoj.com. Feel free to check out Lonnie and his profile that he has on our website. But Lonnie, again, thank you so much, brother, for spending your time with us today. And we're very, very thankful to have you and your wisdom and your experience here on the show, helping us to talk about mental health matters. And today, we're starting off the season strong, like I said, by thinking about the idea of finding peace and hope from the Bible during mental health struggles. Peace and hope from the Bible during mental health struggles. And Lonnie, how about you go ahead and help us understand what we mean when we say those terms? Peace, hope, and mental health struggles.
Well, let's start with mental health. There are two types of behaviors that manifest themselves as mental illness. One is true mental illness, and true mental illness is an organic condition. It's like, an organ is your lungs or your liver or your pancreas. Well, this thing right here, your brain, is also an organ. And so if you have a disruption, either an intrusion, a damage, a genetic condition, a birth condition, or has been exposed to some kind of a toxin, and your brain is not functioning properly, that's an organic condition. It's a medical condition. It's no different than your pancreas not working or your lungs not working. And then there are conditions where our behavior is maladaptive. And it has nothing to do with the way our brain is wired. It has everything to do with the way our brain processes. And that, what we do because it works. It works because we survive. If we survive, it works. So what is comfortable gets repeated, and what gets repeated gets ingrained. And so it's very, very hard to tell the difference between a personality disorder an anxiety disorder, and somebody who's just learned, hey, if I behave this way, I get some kind of reward, I get some kind of benefit. And those are not always conscious rewards. Like I say, it doesn't hurt as bad as the comfort, or the comfort is more important than the hurt, if that makes sense.
Right. And I think it's not just, speaking on that second part there, the maladaptive behavior, it's not just, I learned that if I do this, I will get a reward. Sometimes it's, I learned if I do this, I won't be punished. Right. It's not just the positive reinforcement, but the negative reinforcement there as well.
And sometimes it's subtle. I don't really know it in terms of rewards. It just works. Well, how do I know it works for you? Well, I'm still here. And so, every place I've ever lived has had a rope swing. I grew up swinging on ropes, climbing ropes, pretending to be Spider-Man, Indiana Jones, that kind of stuff. And, even in rock climbing, if you fall, you grab the rope. Now, the rope's there to catch you, not help you climb. But swinging on a rope or climbing on a rope, you have a rule, an implicit belief. When you get in trouble, hold on to the rope. And that works. Until they put you in the river behind a boat and put water skis on you and give you a rope and drag you through the water. And then all of a sudden you lose your balance and you fall off the water skis. And everything I've ever done up to this point says, when you're out of control and you're falling, what do? Hold on to the rope. Well, in the water, if you hold on to the rope, it'll drown you. And the very thing that worked for me up until the point I got behind the boat is now dragging me under and drowning me. That's maladaptive behavior. It's I don't really even know that it doesn't work until I'm in that context. So you take behavior from one context, and it may or may not even be bad behavior. It may just be suboptimal. It may even be behavior that actually works. But if I use it inappropriately in another context, then it's maladaptive or learned behavior or some kind of coping mechanism.
Right. And, we kind of see that sometimes in our own lives where, maybe there's a tradition that we have in our home, kind of as a limited example maybe, but there's a tradition that we have in our home, maybe we don't start eating until everyone gets there, right? Or something like that. And then you go maybe to a restaurant or you go to a cafeteria, and it's a very, very different situation, very, very different atmosphere and circumstance there. And so you're going to be a little bit odd if you wait for everyone else to get their food before you start eating. Because that's not how it works in a restaurant. That's not how it works in a cafeteria. But if that's how you've always done it at home with your family, and you've never, gone to a cafeteria, gone to a restaurant like that before, it's going to be a little bit different for you.
And then my understanding of what I've learned as learned behavior, nobody walks around in my head, nobody walks around in yours. So until it's tested against somebody else, we think everybody sees the world the same way. People who are tech savvy think everybody's tech savvy. People who can do math think everybody else can do math. People who can draw think everybody else can draw, until you realize, hey, my view of the world is different than what I thought it was. And so that's kind of a brush up on mental health. And I put mental health in basically 4 buckets. You have personality disorders, you have mood disorders, you have psychotic disorders, and then I would say you have neurodevelopmental disorders. So, people who have mood disorders have trouble having relationships with their emotions, anxiety, depression, manic depressive, that kind of stuff. People who have personality disorders have trouble having relationships with relationships. The common denominator in all those is, hey, I don't get along at work, I don't get along at church, I don't get along with family, I don't get along with spouse, I don't get along with kids, I don't get along at the HOA, I don't get along at the ball field. So personality disorders, they have trouble having relationships with relationships. Psychotic disorders have trouble having relationships with reality. They either have delusions or hallucinations. There's a processing where their reality and your reality does not overlap. And then neurodevelopmental disorders are basically a brain that is never developed. It's too young. You have a 21-year-old, but functionally he's 12. Or you've got a person who's old and their brain is starting to decline. And I don't count addiction as a mental health disorder. I think there's some trauma-based stuff that affect addiction, but, in a true mental illness, it's something you didn't cause, something you can't cure. And God will not hold you responsible for things which you are not accountable. And so to say, I've got this disease that makes me act this way, and there's a scripture that says you shouldn't act this way, then you have some self-efficacy there, or it wouldn't be considered a sin. Or if you don't have any self-control, then God's not going to punish it as a sin. A 95-year-old guy with dementia who's shoplifting from Walmart isn't going to hell for that. He's 95 years old. He doesn't realize he's shoplifting. He thinks he's buying groceries.
Right. And I appreciate you kind of explaining those four buckets there, Lonnie. I've not heard that phrasing before, but I think it's a really good way of looking at it. You know, the relationship with the relationships, or relationships with your own emotions, or relationship with reality. I think that's a really good way to summarize it. Kind of transitioning here a little abruptly maybe, but kind of transitioning here. How would you, Brother Lonnie, define our other definitions of peace and hope?
I think peace is talked about in the Bible from the standpoint of an internal construct. It's in spite of circumstances. If you look at the term Jesus used in the Beatitudes for blessed, you'll find that is sort of an idea of it is not dependent on your external circumstances. And I think the whole Sermon on the Mount is about internals versus externals. So Jesus starts with this internal construct that you're blessed. And then when you look at Paul's discussion in the book of Philippians, that, peace and joy are things that are internal, not externally driven. And then hope is an earnest expectation. It's not if, but when. You know, the little kid in the car rider line is not sitting there hoping mom comes. He's so confident mom's going to be there. He's throwing rocks at a wasp nest. He's pulling people's hair. He's running around playing tag. He's not sitting there wringing his hands going, man, I did my mom remember to come get me? No, he expects you to be there. So Christian hope is not if, but when God's going to be involved and do something, or providentially be involved. And so peace is an external construct, and hope is really linked to faith, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, just kind of thinking more about those two things, right? I think the reason that we put them together here on this episode is because when you have that peace internally, right? When you're calm of mind and of sound mind, and you're, as Brother Lonnie said, not worrying yourself to death, then you can, remember the promise of the hope that we have in the Scriptures, the promise of the victory that we have in the Scriptures, and the fact that God is faithful to His promises. The fact that, when we read about these promises of a coming hope, of a coming kingdom to be a part of, which is heaven, we don't have to sit there and, as Brother Lonnie said, wring our hands, worrying, well, is heaven real? Will I make it into heaven? What, who's going to be there in heaven? That kind of thing. Because we have a hope. Right? We have a earnest expectation. I love the way that he said that. An earnest expectation. Right? Another word that I've heard used to describe hope is patience. Right? You know that something is going to happen. You just have to wait for it. Right? Kind of like, Brother Lonnie used the example of a small child waiting for his parent to come pick him up from school. Well, another kind of similar example, small child waiting for their parents to come home from work, right? Maybe they've been picked up from school and they're waiting for their dad or their mom to come home from work. They have to be patient for that, right? When's Daddy coming home? Well, he'll be home here in a few minutes. When's Mommy coming home? Well, she'll be home in a few minutes. They have to wait for that, right? Or
and sometimes the waiting is difficult.
Right.
If you look at, it's unfortunate the English Bible separates chapters and verses, but when you look at Hebrews 12, and it talks about the martyrs, you're surrounded by the cloud of witnesses. Well, the martyrs are the guys in the last part of Hebrews 11. It's not Moses and Noah, and it's the guys that were, he talks about all these guys with these superhero Marvel comic book endings. They slew giants and had the dead raised and stopped the mouths of lions and survived the fire. But then he says others. Well, these are the people with the same faith, and their faith did not affect their circumstances. They were cut in half. They were killed by the sword. They were burned at the stake. But even though they had the same faith, their circumstances didn't work out. They still had this hope, because he says, since you're surrounded with this cloud of witnesses, get rid of the weight that easily besets you. Run the race with endurance, looking to Jesus, who, because of the joy that was set before him, that hope, that faith, endured the cross, despised the shame. So hope is about learning to look at what I want most not what I want now. And that's why I think that hope and faith are intricately connected to one another. Because once I realized God's made this promise, then it's just a matter of what do I want now and what do I want most. Well, what you want most involves that patience. And patience, the older translations translate that as long suffering. It's the ability to suffer long. It may not be a pleasant wait, but it's worth the wait, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think it goes back to what we've been talking about all along. And I think in some ways, hope and faith, although they're intricately connected, it also ties in with peace as well. Because if you have hope and if you have faith, then it's going to give you the peace that you need in your life. And so all these things sort of correlate with each other, and one without the other isn't going to work, or it's not going to have its full effect. But if you have each of these elements, it's sort of like a math equation: faith plus hope equals peace. And if one of those is missing, then you're not going to have maybe the peace that you're searching for in your life.
Yeah, and I think it goes the other way as well, right? It's not just faith and hope equals peace, but sometimes you have to have peace in your heart, peace in your mind, before you can realize the hope that is there for you, right? And so, like we've been saying,
I think you're right. I think we talk about the behavioral triangle. Emotions affect your behaviors, which affect your thoughts. Your thoughts affect your emotions, which affect your behaviors. Well, peace and hope and faith, I think, are the same way. My faith gives me peace, that gives me hope. My faith gives me hope, that gives me peace. My peace is because of my hope that gives me faith. I think you can go in any direction with that.
Yeah.
And one of the oldest illustrations that I've heard about peace is they had this contest, and they're going to give $1 million to the guy who can paint the best representation of peace. And of course, you know what gets turned in: snowscapes and sunsets and rainbows, da 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 da. Well, the guy who won the $1 million painted a storm, raging wind, slashing waves, lightning on the horizon, and then in the bottom left-hand corner of the painting was a rock that was leaned up against another rock, and under the rock was a bird, and the bird was asleep. So regardless of what was going on outside, the bird's at peace, he's asleep. The circumstances outside don't bother him. He's got something internal that allows him to sleep in the storm. And that's the true definition of peace. Not that it's a sunset or a rainbow or a snowscape, but hey, there's a storm here, and I'm going to take a nap. That's what Jesus did.
Yeah,
I was about
absolutely.
to say, there's a story in the Bible that sounds very similar to that.
Definitely. I was thinking the same thing, and it's interesting when we think about that story there in Mark chapter 4, the end of Mark chapter 4, like you said, Brother Lonnie, Jesus was asleep in the boat during the storm. His apostles were not, though. Peter and James and John and the rest of them, they were very much awake, and they were very much scared. These were experienced fishermen, a lot of them, and this was a storm that was so bad that it drove even these men who had been on this sea, this body of water, so many times to be scared for their life.
Yeah, and there's crossing, essentially less than a 6-mile body of, at its widest point, Sea Galilee, 6 miles wide. And, like you say, to experienced fishermen, that's just something else.
Yeah, and so, even on that small body of water, which, to be fair, is known for having some pretty bad storms, these fishermen were terrified. And they wake up Jesus and they say, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And Jesus gets up and he says, "Peace, be still." And the winds and the waves, they listened and they stopped. Peace, this idea of peace, sometimes we have a false reality of peace. We have this false reality of peace, that peace means, kind of like what you were saying earlier, Brother Lonnie, that everything is right in the world. But peace is not everything being right in the world. Peace is everything being right in your heart when the world is all wrong. The apostles were not at peace there. The apostles needed a reminder that Jesus was in control in order to find peace. And I think in a similar sense, we have the same misunderstanding about hope, right? We use the word hope very flippantly in today's language. Right? I hope it stops raining. I hope, the ice cream machine at McDonald's isn't broken. I hope, or Organo, yeah. Right? I hope the traffic's not bad. I hope my favorite sports team wins. It's like wishing. It's like wishing on a star or throwing a coin into a fountain. It really doesn't do anything. It really doesn't mean anything. It's a wish for something out of your control to go the way that you want it. But like Brother Lonnie was saying earlier, that's not what our hope is. Our hope isn't a wish upon a star or, blowing out a birthday candle. Our hope is a promise that has been made to us, a promise made to us by a God who has always kept his promises. Right? We can look at the covenants that he's made with people like Noah, where he promised to never again flood the earth. I don't have to swim everywhere I go. He's never again flooded the earth. I think about promises. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Lonnie.
Think about your definition and your explanation of hope, and then what is the classic definition for faith? Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So that's why they're intricately woven, is because it's not this wishing on a star, throwing a coin in a fountain. It's, I can't prove it, but it's real.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then with the idea of the peace comes in spite of the outward circumstances. Well, for emotional health, you've got these internal constructs that my emotions are inside me, they're valid. And a lot of times, especially when we're dealing with spouses or children or people in crisis, we tend to dismiss people's emotions, we deny people's emotions, or we disapprove of their emotions. And the emotions you have are valid. You have to decide, when I have these emotions, if I'm mentally healthy, I'm mentally mature, then I understand that my emotions tell me something. They don't tell me to do something. They're information, not instruction. And people who can't regulate that are not mentally well. They're not mentally healthy. My definition from true mental illness versus maladaptive behavior is, how much emotional insight do you have? Well, so many times people without emotional insight are constantly dealing with distress. They're constantly dealing with these feelings of failure. They're constantly dealing with anxiety because they don't have the self-regulation of people who have emotional intelligence. And that's the thing that robs us from our peace.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like the way that you said that there, Brother Lonnie. It's, the emotions that we feel, yes, they are valid, but they are information, not instruction. Right? Just because I feel a certain way doesn't mean that I have to respond a certain way. It just tells me, hey, this is what my body is saying to me right now.
So if you quote Daniel Goleman in his book, Emotional Intelligence, now, Goleman's going to say our brains evolved. Just ignore that. But he said, you have emotional insight. That's knowing your emotions, recognizing a feeling as it happens. So then you have self-regulation, and that's handling a feeling, and it's appropriate, is the ability that builds on self-awareness. Now, if I know what my emotions are, and I'm self-aware, I understand this is information, not instruction, then I have the ability for self-soothing. I can calm myself down. I can make myself feel better. I can shake off anxiety. I can shake off gloom. I can shake off irritability and the consequences of failure. And then Goleman says people who are poor at this skill are constantly battling feelings of distress. So you look at our anxiety-torn society right now, and it's basically not because anything is substantially different. It's we've told people you respond to your emotions differently. And so they can't self-soothe, they can't self-regulate. They think, oh, I feel irritable, I've got to be irritable. I feel depressed, I've got to act depressed. And we're not talking about being duplicitous, but we're just talking about not letting your emotions control how you interact with the world. And people who don't do that are always distressed. They're always anxious, they're always nervous, they're always sad.
So how do we learn, Brother Lonnie, to listen to our emotions but not let them control us? Especially for us as Christians, or maybe especially for Christians who struggle with things like anxiety or depression. How do we listen to our emotions without letting them roll over us?
So there's a balance. Be anxious for nothing. It does not mean you can't worry about something. What that word means is don't be pulled in two directions. Don't. Am I going to trust the power of God, or am I going to trust the power of Satan? Am I going to trust the spiritual or the physical? So when I don't trust the right one, I can be torn in two directions. So the first thing is that it's not inappropriate to have proper concern about something. Paul says, the daily cares of the church are a reward and a burden on me. Jesus says, I'm exceedingly sorrowful, even to the point of death. That was an anxiety kind of a thing. So it's not that you can't feel it. It's recognizing when it's normal and when it's abnormal. Normal emotions lead us to balance and harmony. Godly sorrow works repentance that leads to salvation, not to be regretted. If I feel guilty about something, I need to clean my act up. If I feel guilty about something and it makes me withdraw from people, it makes me start lying or hiding, or it makes me self-destruct, then guilt's not done what it's supposed to do. Guilt in and of itself is supposed to lead me to balance and harmony. So anytime I have an emotion and it produces distress, destruction, or dysfunction, my emotion is probably proper, but my use of the emotion is not. It's not the emotion, but the byproduct. Does that?
Yeah,
make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
Okay,
and it
so-
sort of ties into like the phrase that we've always heard. It's not. It's how you respond to situations. I forget the exact phraseology of the phrase. But
It's not whether or not you fall; it's how you
yeah,
get back up.
How you get back up. Yeah, and so
Yeah, and so I've got these emotions, and it's not. I'm not supposed to have the emotions. There are some things that make me angry. They hit. That's it. In a lot of cases, that just flares. It happens on the non-conscious part of your brain. It's probably tied into the amygdala somehow. And so, I don't get to choose that this doesn't bother me, this doesn't scare me.
Sure.
Emotional regulation is not having the emotion. Anger control is not ever getting angry. It's I'm angry. Now, how do I respond to the anger?
It's validating that emotion and then figuring out how to go from there, right?
Yeah, hey, I'm angry. Now, why am I angry? Well, I'm angry because I'm frustrated. I'm angry because it's unfair. I'm angry because you were cruel. I'm angry because you were mean. Okay, now what am I going to do about it? Be angry and do not sin. Don't let the sun go down upon your wrath.
Right. And so with all of these things, whether it's anxiety or anger or depression or whatever it is, it's about letting you, feel that emotion, but not letting that emotion go to its extreme. Right. You mentioned guilt there, Brother Lonnie. Guilt, as you mentioned, is a natural response to when we know that we've done something wrong. Shame, however, in the clinical sense, is taking that guilt to its extreme and not allowing ourselves to move forward from that guilt. Kind of like what you were talking about, where we shut down, we hide ourselves away, we stop finding worth in ourselves because we're beating ourselves up. We're so shameful. We're so ashamed about what we've done, right? And so with all of these things, the emotions themselves are not the problem. It's taking that emotion to its extreme that gets us into trouble.
Right. Or letting that emotion become our identity. And it's not inappropriate to say, but when you're teaching this to children, I'm depressed, I'm sad, I'm angry. No, I'm Lonnie. I feel depressed. I'm Lonnie. I feel sad. But when you take it to its extreme, your emotion becomes your identity. And so guilt is I've done something wrong. Shame is I am something wrong. And those are two different things there.
I think that's a huge, huge point.
Yeah.
And that's something that we as a culture don't do a great job of, right? We say things like, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm angry. But I think you bring up a great point, Brother Lonnie, that our identity is not in those things, because those things are in the moment, right? I can be depressed for a series of days or weeks, maybe even longer sometimes, but I'm eventually going to get out of that depression, right? Especially if I'm taking care of myself, if I'm going to therapy, if I'm surrounding myself with people who love me and are trying to help me, right? I'm not going to stay in that depressed episode forever. That's why it's called an episode, not a show.
Or in the worst case scenario, I can't. The brain signals I get from my brain tells me life is horrible, life is worthless. But what would it look like if I lived as if I weren't depressed? Now, it doesn't change my feeling.
Sure.
This is terrible. Well, but I probably still need to hug my wife. I still need to play with my children. I probably still need to go to work. I still need to compliment people. Again, it's does that emotion, whether it's because of circumstances in my interpretation of them, or whether it's an organic condition, does it have to become the blueprint for how I live? My dad is a chronic pain patient, and he'll want to go hunting. He's 86. I said, Dad, doesn't it hurt you to hunt? He goes, it hurts me to sit on the couch. I might as well sit in a deer stand. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to be just as depressed at home as I am going to be at church. I'm going to be just as depressed at home as I'm going to be at work, but they don't pay me to sit home. They pay me to go to work. And so now there's some extreme cases where the mental side, where you've got a true organic depression, is debilitating, and you just can't suck it up and move on. But we're talking extreme examples. There are people who don't get out of bed, don't go to the bathroom. They're so depressed. Those are, again, they're not in therapy. They're not on medication, or their medication needs to be changed and they're not working. And we don't really understand why medicine works. And so when somebody tells you, well, they're adjusting my medicine, or I quit taking it because it wasn't working, they're not dodging you. They're not being disingenuous. There's observational research that says this medicine works, but what works on me won't work on you, and what works on you won't work on Isaiah. And so what happens is that, or won't work on Walker. But what happens is that they start regulating those medicines, and your system either rebels against it or just doesn't work as well on you. And then somebody says, well, I'm taking this medicine that has all these side effects, and it's not helping me feel better anyway, so why feel better and feel bad and have side effects? I'm not going to quit taking it. And then we judge them and go, well, if you just take your medicine. Well, sometimes the medicine quits working.
Yeah, that's very true. From my own experience, I've recently started taking some anxiety medication. It had gotten to the point where I needed some additional help. And the first medicine that I tried didn't do anything. Didn't make me feel good. Didn't make me do bad. It was like I was just, taking a placebo. It didn't do anything. And I've gotten that change, and it's starting to work a little bit better now that I'm on a different one.
Yeah.
And so, that is a real thing that you're talking about there, Brother Lonnie. It's not just an issue of, well, they're not trying, or they don't want it to get better. People in those circumstances want it to get better. They don't want to be where they are. They don't like where they are. They want it to change.
Better,
And so we talk about, the peace. Let's camp out on anxiety a little bit, because anxiety is the opposite of peace. I'm worried, I'm stressed, I'm whatever. So when a person has an anxiety attack, the heart starts racing, the lungs change into breathing, your muscles tighten up, you get that goofy feeling in your stomach. When that happens, is your body working properly?
No.
Your body's working 100% like it was designed to work. Anxiety, the response to that is a physiological response that makes you alert, motivated, and strong. A bear crashes into my studio window, I'm going to have to decide to fight it or run from it. If I'm going to fight it or run from it, what do I have to have? I got to be alert, motivated, and strong. I got to have adrenaline. I got to have oxytocin. I got to have norepinephrine. I've got to have all kind of hormones. Well, what's the quickest way to get hormones into your bloodstream? Dump it into your stomach. Well, now I'm sick because I got a stomach full of hormones. Well, how to get those hormones out of my stomach? Well, my heart has to brace fast. My heart has to beat faster. And then as my heart beats faster, my lungs have to keep up. Well, my heart and lungs are beating faster. Sometimes the peripheral stuff, my ears, my fingers, they don't need as much blood, so everything goes to the core. Well, now I've got all these physiological symptoms, and it feels like I'm dying. It feels like I'm having a heart attack, when really my body's revving its engine. It's getting me ready to put hands on or run away from. And so the first thing about peace is, don't seek silence. Learn to be at peace with the noise. This is how my body feels when it's ready to do work. Now, why is my body ready to do work? Well, a bear came through the window, or I've got to run, I've got to fight. But I got to take a test today. Anxiety. Well, my brain just told me that taking a test is as dangerous as a bear. I've never seen anybody killed from a test. I've had some tests I felt like murdered me. But, in truth, it's not how our bodies are responding. It's how our minds interpret the situation. talking to a girl, taking a test, doing a job interview, having an evaluation from the elders. So I go, okay, my body is responding to a signal that says I got to run or fight. What in this situation do I need to put hands on? Nothing. What in this situation do I need to run from or avoid? Nothing. It's unpleasant, but it's not dangerous. Oh, but my body responded to the danger signal as if there was danger. And once I start talking about, this is really not something that my body needs to work that hard on because I'm really not in danger, I make peace with the symptoms, and then I think through, the state trait anxiety. Oh, this is really not that bad. And then
It's all about perception.
yeah, it does involve some perception. Now, there's a condition called dysautonomia, and it's where your adrenal glands and that fight-flight mechanism and the parasympathetic nervous system jump into high gear, and that's a medical condition called dysautonomia. It's not necessarily a psychological condition. And some people self-regulate easier than others. And some of that has to do with your background, some of that has to do with your maturity, some of that has to do with, how you interpret trauma. Because I don't get to pick what's traumatic for you. You don't get to pick what's traumatic for me. Neither do I get to pick what's scary to you. There's some things, one of the bravest guys I know would not stand in front of a room and talk to people. Now, if something happened, and I won't ever have to do it, but if I had to go through a door, this is one of the guys I'd call. He's one of the bravest guys I know. But he will stand in front of a room and teach a class. There's no way he'd do it. And so, he when we started deer hunting together, he'd kill more people than he had deer. He's a brave, serious dude, okay? But stand in front of a room and give a devotional, stand in front of a room and lead a prayer, stand in front of a room and teach a class, then no way. He'd fight his way out of that room before he'd do it. And so what doesn't scare him scares me, and what doesn't scare me scares him. And so when the anxiety shows up, the first thing I do is I make peace with my body. Oh, wow. This is a stressful situation. Is it okay to admit I'm having stress? It's stressful to meet with the elders. It's stressful to talk to this girl. It's stressful to have this report to you. How does my body respond to stress? Hormones, heart rate, breathing changes, muscle tightness. Okay, is there anything wrong with me? No. Now, maybe I'm overblowing how stressful this is, but that's okay. As long as I recognize my body's having a stress response, then I'm not scared of the panic attack anymore.
Yeah.
Is that too simplistic?
No.
Okay, all right.
I understand it at least. I don't know. Isaiah, do you?
I don't think it's hard to understand. I think it's one of those things that it's difficult for people who struggle with anxiety to remember in the moment.
Yeah.
Right. And so, the advice that Brother Lon is giving is excellent advice. But when you're having that reaction, when your heart is beating out of your chest, when you can't breathe, when you feel like someone's sitting on you and your mind is racing a million miles a minute, it's going to be hard to remember that. Yeah. Right. And so that means that beforehand, right, while you're in those moments of peace already, you have to be preparing for war, right? You have to be preparing for that battle. You have to be focused on, okay, if this happens, this is what I'm going to do. Right? Have a plan in action. And
in that early stage, we call the amygdala hijack. You got this little structure in the back of your brain, almond shaped. There's two of them. And when they get triggered, they bypass the prefrontal cortex. They bypass your executive functions, and you immediately go into action. Now, it's designed to do that, okay? Because when a bear comes through the window, I don't want this part of my brain going, is that a brown bear or is that a black bear? Is that a cinnamon bear? I want the part of my brain that bypasses all that junk and just yell, bear! And then I'm going to do what I'm going to do. So when it works properly, it works like it's designed to do. But when we get hijacked, that's because in the heat of the moment, it's my emotions that are driving the bus, not my intellect. And it's not about being only intellectual or only emotional. It's having a balance between the two. What do I feel? What do I know? And especially with couples, when couples start to argue, your heart rate goes above 100 beats a minute in an argument. You move to this part of your brain, and you're about as complicated as a goat. So I tell my couples, count your pulse. What happens when you count your pulse? Well, you're doing math. And math doesn't come from the emotional part of your brain, it comes from the logical part of your brain. So, something happens here and I start to feel myself get triggered. I start looking for facts. You're wearing a red shirt. You're wearing a black vest. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 15 squares behind you with rough patches on the wall. Well, I just moved my brain from the emotion to the intellect. And then when I get in the intellect, I can say, oh, now, what do I feel? What do I know? But if I just stay in the emotional part, it's hard to process. So I lose my peace and I lose my calm and I'm full of anxiety. And instead of talking to me about my emotions, you dismiss my emotions. You don't really feel that way. It's not that big a deal. You deny my emotions. Now, you're not really angry. Or you disapprove of my emotions. You can't be angry. Well, what does that do? Well, it makes me feel like I'm stupid. I don't understand myself. And now not only do I don't know my emotions. I can't talk to you about them because you tell me I'm stupid. But when you start emotion coaching, okay, so you're having a panic attack. What is scary to you? It's this, this, and this. Oh, I bet you think nobody else understands how stressful this class is for you. Yes, this class is stressful. And I'm not telling you you're reasonable. I'm not telling you you're rational. I'm not even really agreeing with you. I'm letting you know I know how you feel about it. And once you have permission to feel that way, you feel heard, you feel understood, and you feel accepted. What just happened to your anxiety? I got a guy here that gets me. And then it starts to level down. That's what we do for de-escalation training.
Yeah, absolutely, Brother Lonnie. And I appreciate you bringing up all these thoughts. It makes me think a whole lot about self-control, right? About being able to, whether you're in the moment or out of the moment, just being able to say, this is what I'm going to do, right? And as you mentioned, Brother Lonnie, having someone there who helps you feel your feelings, helps you understand what you're feeling, that's awesome, right? And that's very needed, right? But having that control over yourself, both before and during and after whatever's going on, before the event, that's what's needed.
And this goes deep into what you guys talked about when you say peace, hope, and mental health. Paul tells Timothy, you've not been given a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Some versions translate that. You've been given a spirit of love, power, and of self-control. What if you came into the planet and you didn't have that?
If you didn't have that, you wouldn't know what to do.
Okay. And if you didn't have that, would it be a medical condition?
I would think so, but I've been wrong before.
Okay. So now I'm on the planet and I don't possess the ability mentally for self-control. Does that mean I have weak faith?
No.
Does that mean I'm lesser of a Christian?
No.
Does that mean I just need to suck it up and get over it?
Absolutely not.
That's the difference between maladaptive behavior and true mental illness. So a person who deals with anxiety as a medical condition is not somebody who is weak in their Christianity. It's not somebody who's suffering from some fatal flaw. It's the idea that, oh, wow, when Paul says you've been given a spirit of love, power, and a sound mind, I believe everything in the New Testament is assuming that we're talking to people that live under the bell curve of normalcy. I don't believe he's talking about people with personality disorders. I don't believe he's talking about people who are mentally ill. I don't believe he's talking about people who don't possess self-efficacy. And so the church beats people up and they lose their peace because we've never taught that there's a difference between people who can't versus people who don't.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good.
And like you said, this all goes back to the idea of self-control, and it also goes back to what you were saying at the very beginning of the show, that God's not going to hold us accountable for things that are out of our control.
Yes.
Right?
And that's the message of hope.
Control, and there are things that God controls. And like you said, like you were just about to say, and I'm sorry that I cut you off, but that's the message of hope.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is the fact that God is not going to hold us accountable for what we cannot control.
Absolutely.
Having a mental illness does not make you a bad Christian. having a mental illness does not make you a bad person. It just means that you're somebody whose brain works a little bit differently, and so that's one of your challenges that you've got to do, that you've got to beat. One of your crosses to bear, so to speak, is that you've got to learn how to cope with that mental illness, learn how to cope with the things of the world and the things even of your own mental, even of your own mental capacity.
Yes, and the cope is the magic word. We use the 3 C's. I didn't cause it. That's a mental illness. I can't cure it. That's a mental illness. How do I learn to cope with it? Now, things that can be cured or dealt with, then you're talking about, hey, I got to analyze my behavior and see if this is, maladaptive behavior, see if it's a pattern of learning, see if it's a pattern of a coping or a defensive mechanism that I've just developed through the years. And so learning that, hey, I'm never going to not be anxious. How do I deal with interpreting my anxiety, and do I let it control me, or do I control my response to it? And even, people with obsessive compulsive disorder, they're never going to not be obsessive, but you can change your response to the obsessions rather than make them. And I think we misunderstand that, hey, in order for you to deal with this, you've got to not be anxious. No. You're allowed to be anxious all you want to. Just how do you respond to the anxiety? That's the big deal.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a great way to wrap up the show. Just to end off with that conclusion there, we can't cure it. It's about how you cope with it. And that's why we have people like you, Brother Lonnie, to help us talk about these things. And we have the brothers and sisters around us who can help us cope with these sort of things.
Well, let me just tell you that this is a deeper discussion than I
Absolutely.
maybe thought we would have, and I applaud you 2 young gentlemen for being as well versed and have done your research to have this conversation with me. I appreciate being your guest. I'm proud of you guys. I'm proud of what you do, and it makes me feel like one of the cool kids to get to hang out with you.
Hey, we feel pretty cool getting to have you on the show, brother.
Right,
So
yeah.
Well, thank you guys very
thankful for
much.
you. And we're very thankful, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, for all you guys who listen. And if you have any comments or any questions, make sure to reach out to us at TTT. I did it again. www.tteoj.com.
Too many T's, I
Yeah,
guess.
there's too many T's.
Oh, wow. You guys froze up on me. I don't know where you're at. I think you guys left the show. I'll see you guys later.
Is he still there?
No, he's not there, but it's true.